Hello, everyone. It's very lovely to be once again in your virtual company at this year's edition of FestivalYA. And today I have the honor to be in the, again, virtual presence of one of the recently translated into Romanian YA authors. And she's here with us, and I will kindly ask her to introduce herself in a couple of seconds. I would just like to say that we will soon have her second book called Say Yes Summer. Yeah, Vara în care am spus doar da in Romanian. It will be available, and it's already available actually for pre-orders on Editura Nemira's website, but it will be shipped starting with the 15th of June. So if you haven't had the chance to grab your copy yet, you can go on their website and click a few times over there and get the book. So it's on pre-order at this moment. And as I said, this is not the author's first book, but more about that a bit later. For the moment, welcome, Lindsey. We're very happy to have you.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
Hi. So just as I promised before, maybe shyer people start asking us questions on social media because we're being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. I have a couple of questions of my own just for a bit of warm-up. So I will just start by saying that I was very fascinated by how you seem to have traveled in the US with, your history and everything. So basically, as far as I read, you went to school in one place, and then you decided to go to another place, and then you decided to move to a third place, and so on and so forth. And I was just curious about what motivated these kind of changes in your life.
Sure. So one of the things I think that's really unique about the United States in general is that there's such different areas of the country. If you like desert, if you like beach, if you like mountains, like it's all there. I grew up in an area known as the Midwest, which is a lot of farmland. If you've heard of Chicago, the state that I grew up in, Chicago is in that state. And so I went to a school in a neighboring state that had a really good journalism program. That was what I thought I wanted to be. I was a journalist. And then I realized after my college experience, I didn't actually want to be a journalist. I didn't like telling real stories. I wanted to make up stories. So I went to a graduate program to study creative writing in Baltimore, Maryland, which is on the East Coast of the United States, about 3 hours from New York City. And I've stayed here ever since, and I really enjoy it. And it's a lovely kind of area of the country. We have mountains about 3 hours away and the beach about 3 hours away and farmland in the middle. So it's kind of like a little microcosm of the United States.
Yeah, that's actually sounds quite amazing. And all the time I was thinking that, you basically, you personally, but generally Americans as well tend to move a lot as opposed to other people. I mean, for various reasons, either they get a different job or I don't know, they're like from military families, or there's a lot of other reasons for which they tend to move a lot. But I think that also this kind of thing enriches their experience. And I was curious if that also worked for you. Like, do you feel that you were inspired by this kind of changes around you in your books?
Yes, actually, it's really interesting because this book, Say Yes Summer, is set in the Midwest. And I never wrote about the Midwest until I moved away from it. And now that I have this distance and perspective, I'm like, oh, I miss like Lake Michigan is near Chicago. And it's a huge lake. It almost feels like an ocean. Like you look out and you just can't see anything. And it has not a tide, but kind of waves and a lot of beaches, sandy beaches and areas. And so that's where this book is set. And I don't think I really gained perspective on that until I wasn't living there anymore. So I think Maybe if I move from Baltimore, then I'll write a book and set it in Baltimore. I think I would have a hard time setting a book where I'm currently living. I'm not sure why, but
Maybe a bit of nostalgia. Who knows?
yeah, the perspective, nostalgia, I'm not sure.
Mm. But as I was saying before, this book that we're going to talk a bit more about a tad later, you also wrote a book called This Above All, which was basically published in 2016. It hasn't been translated in Romania yet, who knows? But yeah, that was your first. And I haven't really found too much information on it. I don't know why exactly. So I was just curious to ask you, how do you feel about this first book, and how do you feel that it was, received by the public?
Yeah, it was, well, I think most people, your first book, it's, you're still kind of learning and growing and exploring what publishing means. And it's a book that's near and dear to my heart. It was also set in the Midwest, and set in a high school. And I am still really proud of that book. I'm hoping, actually, I think the publisher that originally published it has since closed. And so I'm hoping maybe it'll find new life in another capacity soon. But it's a book about a girl who grows up in a very conservative, dogmatic environment and family. And then she goes and auditions for Romeo and Juliet and actually gets cast as Romeo, which is pretty controversial because she's a girl and she's not supposed to wear pants, much less, play the part of a boy, but she's a really fabulous actor. And that process kind of expands her worldview.
That sounds pretty amazing, actually. Like, how did you come up with this kind of topic?
Well, something sort of similar happened in my actual high school, that there was someone cast, because she was a tenor, was cast as a part, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Pirates of Penzance or the Mikado. It was something like that. One of those old timey, musicals. And it was a huge controversy and everybody freaked out. And the director ended up resigning from doing the play because if he couldn't have the person he wanted, then he didn't want to do it. And so I kind of used that little kernel of truth and then extrapolated a whole different family and character from it.
How is this for you? Because I don't know, for us in Romania, there isn't too much of a tradition, to have this kind of high school musicals, high school plays, this kind of casting tradition and everything that we see in TV series and in films and we read about in books. But I think that even in my time, but mostly recently, I think more and more teenagers get into theater, maybe not as much into musicals because we don't have such a, long-term tradition in musicals, but so much into theater, into drama, into expressing themselves. And we have a lot of inter-high school competitions, and we have a lot of, this kind of rivalries between high schools because of, who has the cooler drama group. So I was just going to ask you if, because you mentioned it and you decided to have one of your books set up in this kind of sphere, like is this really important for your culture? Like, how did you perceive it, this whole drama musical thingy?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the United States it's kind of they're known as the theater kid, and it's oftentimes you find people who have an artistic leaning. Maybe they don't feel like they fit in with the the sports, the athletes, or the really overly academic, where they're sort of trying to find themselves. I think especially when I was in high school, a lot of this has changed, I think, culturally a little bit, but a lot of people who felt like outsiders either because of their gender or sexuality or in a small town where there's a lot of conservative mindset, really gravitated toward theater experiences. And then there are also kids who are just really, really, really artistically gifted, either vocally or as actors. And so theater programs, it varies by school, but they can be a really, really important place for those kids to kind of find themselves and explore. And I wouldn't say many people I went to high school with ended up doing it on a professional level or even in college. But it's, community theater is still very important and vibrant. And a lot of people find that as a creative outlet. The same way you might, run marathons or play on a ultimate frisbee or whatever, ride horses, whatever kind of thing it is that you like to do as a hobby. There's a lot of that still persists, I think.
Which group were you in when you were in high school?
I was jack of all trades and master of none, kind of. I could split with a lot of the different. I wanted to be a tennis player. I was not very good at tennis, but I loved it. I wanted to be a theater kid. I was not very good at it, but I loved it. So I sort of tried my hand at a lot of things.
Yeah, it actually makes sense. I think pretty much this is how a lot of us feel, actually, although I don't know maybe the kids these days, but for us it was that much of a tradition, because our high schools are sort of already put into some kind of categories. For example, I graduated from an art high school, so it was already clear that basically what we did, as opposed to other kids from other high schools, it was to paint and to draw or to play music. So I think this kind of distinction really sort of already puts you in a sort of box and doesn't really give you opportunities. So when I started to explore languages, everything was a bit weird for me, because people were like, oh, why do you study in an art high school if you want to study languages? Well, yeah.
Yeah, I would say too, like at least where I grew up in a smaller town, we didn't have a lot of those sorts of specialized high schools. They were just kind of like, you either went to the public high school or there were some like parochial or religious high schools, and that was pretty much it. But where I live now, there are magnet programs. So there's an arts high school that's, that you can apply to or audition to be in. And I think that's really cool. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I can relate. How did you decide to go with YA of all genres? I mean, you could have tried everything else, right? So why YA?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I was in my MFA, which is Master's of Fine Arts program for grad school, I had a professor. I thought I was going to write like very highbrow adult literary, because that's what you sort of do with a lot of short stories. And I had a instructor tell me, oh, well, your voice is very well suited to YA. And she meant it as like a slight or an insult. Or like a cut down. And I was like, YA. And when I was a kid, YA wasn't really a thing yet. It was sort of emerging. You had, your middle grade, and then it was kind of like in high school, we read all the classics, and they didn't really have the and the, Libba Brays and all of that had not happened yet. So so I went to the library and I was looking at this section of YA, and I was like, okay, I'm going to check out a couple of these YA books. And my mind was blown, because they were so creative and they are able to take risks and try different things. I read The Book Thief and I was like, oh, YA is amazing. So I joined a couple of writer groups that were just people that would come together, critique each other's work. And I learned more about the voice and the sort of expectations of young adult, and I never looked back.
A lot of authors I'm talking to mention this kind of critique groups or this kind of support groups, or they have a sort of email group where they send each other their work and everything. And I was thinking that actually it's something quite important in the life of a writer. How is this experience for you?
It's been transformative. I was in a group with a lot of people who were just starting out in young adult. I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. And we had, first it was like a chat board, and then it was a Slack group, and we would email each other snippets or chapters. And over time, it's been really fun to watch those people and their work, and how much it's developed and how much it's changed and how much they've grown. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with Courtney Summers, but she was one that was in a group I was in, and Kara Thomas, who writes very cool, twisty, dark. So we all write very different things, but it was just a nice place to find like support of people who are going through the same process. And and then cheer each other on as you have successes, and, you know, console each other as you get rejection letters or break up with agents or whatever happens. So I think it's really important, especially because writing can be such a lonely craft. You know, you sort of do it all yourself, and then you spend all this time working on a manuscript, and then you have to be like, is it any good, or did I just waste, you know, 6 weeks banging out this draft? And it's terrible. And also, I think it's helpful to have people who can give you perspective on, you know, some of the things. Maybe there's a plot hole that you didn't see, or a character that needs to be further developed, and sometimes you're so close to a thing that you can't see that. So having other people that can come in and who know writing and who know all of these elements to help you is really important.
And also, I think to have a good agent and to have a good editor and basically to have a good
Yes.
publishing team.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing, you have to have a good manuscript, and then you can have a good agent, and then you can have a good editor. It all is like a domino, you know, you have to have the one. So starting with that good group so that you can find a good agent. And a lot of times those same people are also either have agents or are looking for agents. And so that process can be less lonely and less daunting, because they can say, oh, I queried this agent, and they might be a really good fit for you in this manuscript, which is also a really important part of the whole journey.
Coming slowly to the current book that we were mentioning at the beginning of this QA about Say Yes Summer, there was a gap of 4 years between your first book and your second book. Was there a particular reason for this? Were you hesitating about the story, or were there other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, it was 4 years. So from the time a book comes out, there's usually about 2 or 3 years that it actually took to get to that point. So my first book came out, and then about a year or so later, we had this deal, and then there's revisions, and then there's the time it takes to actually publish it. So it would be really, you have to be very prolific, I think, to have like a book out I have a few friends who do this, but you have to be able to also juggle multiple projects at the same time. And I'm one of those people where I have to like live in a story, and I have to complete that story. I can't be working on 2 different manuscripts. So I probably am a little bit slower and more spaced out than most writers that write full time, because this isn't my full time job either. I have a full time job, and I have kids and a spouse, so it's like.
Right. So this is a reality that you also live in, because we also have this conversation often in Romania about writers not being full-time writers, at least not all of them, or not the majority of them. And many of them actually struggle with this idea of having to write, you know, part-time or at weekends or something like this. So somehow it gives me hope to see that this also happens in America, which is like,
oh yeah,
possibly the strongest market for publishing in the world. So
yeah, and it's one of those things where, you know, when you write a book, generally if the publisher says, yes, I want to buy this, and they, you know, you get an advance and you see these dollar signs, there's money, and you're like, wow. But then if you really think about like how long it took to write it and how long it'll be before the next one will come out, it doesn't end up being all that much money. Like it would be really hard to sustain your life on a writer's, unless you're, you know, somebody who writes, you know, big Stephanie Meyer like stuff. But for the average mid-list writer, you know, it's enough to compensate your time, and it's, you know, makes it worth it, but it's also not like a full-time salary.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And also I think that it's always good to have a plan B. So yeah. Well, Say Yes Summer, how did you come up with this idea?
So this is a really interesting, because I worked with a group called Alloy Entertainment, and they are a book, what do they call themselves, a book developer, book packager, something like that. And they sort of see holes or niches, or talk with different publishing houses and editors and say, this is sort of what I want to do. So we worked together on the concept, and then I drafted it, and then we worked together on revisions, and then my editor and I worked on revisions, and then it came out. So it was like an extra sort of I don't know, like not a middleman, because that doesn't sound right, but another sort of creative voice in the process, which was really helpful because it took a lot of time to sort of develop a few of the characters. And it was, like I said, with a critique group, it was kind of like that, only these are actual professionals who have done this many, many times. So they were really, really astute at helping kind of point out what needed to be developed more.
Yeah,
And then it's based on, I spent summers in Michigan, at Lake Michigan. And so that's kind of what I based it on.
That's quite an interesting process, actually, when I come to think of it, what you just described. I mean, to have all this sort of teamwork, but and it's also, I mean, for me, it seemed to be somehow a very positive book, and also the cover I very much enjoyed, and the colors, and somehow it's like a very, very good book for the summer. I mean, it sounds cliche, but you know, it's something like not necessarily a beach read. For example, I'm not a beach person, but you know, something that you would take in your hands and read, you know, to relax and to forget a bit. We're also starting to have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to start taking them. So we have one from Roxy. What would your dream cast be if, say, SMO would get a movie adaptation?
Oh man. I have had conversations about that with people at various gatherings. It's hard for me to think, because sometimes I think I would have a person that I would have in mind, and then somebody will suggest somebody, I'm like, oh, you're so right, that would be a great person. And it's funny because people often ask, did you have somebody in your head as you were writing and describing? And I really didn't. Not real people. I kind of like to scour the internet for pictures of people, but they're just sort of, you know, ads or Pinterest board people, not actual actors or famous people. Dream cast. Somebody was trying to tell me the other day, oh, what's the guy that's in Dune?
Timothée Chalamet.
They thought that would be a good Miles, which is like the sort of the main. And I was like, oh, I could see it, because he's kind of good looking, but also a little bit weird. So I think maybe that. I don't know. I haven't really thought about Rachel in a while, or who she would be. It's a good question. I need to go back and think, because when this book came out, the actors who were sort of the young people in Hollywood are now like playing, you know, moms. So I have to rethink, who would it be? But I do think Timothée Chalamet would be a great Miles.
I think Roxy agrees. I saw a couple of hearts over there. Yeah. And also, you have another question from her. If you had to choose, are you Team Clayton or Team Miles?
Oh, man. Well, so I can tell you that originally there was a slightly different ending to the book, and the entire publishing team at Delcourt was like, oh, we think you need to rethink this. So I had to switch it up. And I was glad to, because I think I'm Team Miles. I like Clayton. He's lovely, but I think I'm Team Miles.
I think Roxy also approves this, her reaction. Yeah. Okay. So basically, I think you're in the same team. Good. And we also have a question from Mariuka. I was also curious about this, so thank you so much for mentioning Liba Bray. I mean, God, I think it's ages since I heard her name mentioned. I mean, that's my life journal time we're talking about. It's like 15 years ago. So thank you, Lindsey, for mentioning her. And the question goes like, you mentioned Liba Bray. Which is your favorite series, and why A Great and Terrible Beauty?
Do you mean which Liba Bray series, or is there only one correct answer, which is A Great and Terrible Beauty?
It's only one correct answer.
Okay.
There was a bit of anticipation there. It's okay.
I love the Diviners, but A Great and Terrible Beauty is the first one, and
it is
the only correct answer right now.
I agree. Right. Okay. So since there is a bit of a break in the chat, I will continue with the stuff that I had in mind. And thank you so much for these interruptions. Keep interrupting me, people. And also leave us questions on social media. So if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to leave questions in the comments and somehow they will get to us and Lindsey will get to answer. So back to Say Yes to Summer. Was there a difficult moment that you had while writing it, or do you think that everything went like smoothly and it went very fine?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, part of it was I was trying to, well, the path we thought we were going to take, we ended up diverging from. And I think it's because Miles as a character became a lot more developed and more meaningful than he was meant to be. I think I surprised the publishers and the team at Alloy with how well developed he became. So it was challenging because then we had to go back and sort of rethink some of the things we thought were going to happen in light of, you know, Miles being a much more balanced, well-rounded, and swoon-worthy character. And then, you know, revisions are always hard because sometimes there's things you really, really love and you write these scenes or these moments or even characters that you're like, oh, I love this. And then it doesn't make it into the final version for whatever reason. Either it's just, you know, it's not working, or we're tight on space, or we have to rethink things. And so that process is always really hard. I call it killing your darlings, and it's hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. And was there actually something that surprised you? Like a character or a scene that didn't really turn out the way you were planning?
Yeah, you know, well, Niles, obviously. And I was really adamant that we wanted sort of the female antagonist to not be just a stereotypical mean girl, that there had to be more to her, Bethany. And so that was challenging because she had to be sort of the not antagonist, the corollary, there's a word, to Rachel, but without being like a stereotype, typical, like just mean for mean's sake. And so kind of getting to explore that was really fun. And then one of my favorite scenes that I just like made up on a fly because they were like, we need something else here, is when Rachel and Miles go on the like hike walk. And I was surprised at how much I loved that scene. That was sort of a crap, we need something else. You've got 2 days, send it to us. And okay.
Yeah, sometimes I think that characters or stories can surprise us like this.
Yeah, I think when you know the character really well and you can kind of just put them in whatever scenario and let them work together. And it probably helped that I wrote that after I had pretty much written most of the book. So I really knew these characters. So it was fun.
You do strike me as a pretty organized person. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't know if you're one of those authors who have like a very specific routine and who like to outline and plan a lot. And do you feel that you'd be in that category?
Yeah, it's funny, the great debate. Are you a plotter or a pantser? I like a little bit of both. I like to sort of have a map, or at least a suggestion of a map, but I'm also willing to be like, ooh, look at what does that say over there? Like if you're taking a road trip and you have like, here's where we're starting and here's where we're ending up, but you might say, oh, it looks like there's this cool thing we should see off on this side, so let's take a detour. And I think that's kind of the way that I prefer to write. I like to be surprised a little bit, but I also like to sort of have at least a semblance of an idea of what's coming.
Yeah, that actually makes sense, and it seems a bit safe somehow.
Yeah, I admire people who can just sit down and sort of like have a kernel of an idea or a character and just like bleh. But for me, it makes me too nervous that I'll just have to go back and like kill so many things that I love because they aren't working. So I guess it's my way of trying to not have to kill too many darlings.
Yeah, it does make sense. Safety first. Right, we have a couple of new questions in the chat at the moment. There's a question coming from Facebook, and it says, what book would you recommend for readers who like to say yes, summer?
Oh man. Let me think. Well, if you've read the series like Love and Gelato, and I think there are 3 of them, but that's the first one that comes to mind. And not just because it's about ice cream too, but I think those are similar. I cannot remember who wrote it. I should look it up. Love and Gelato. I think they made a Netflix, or they are making Netflix if it hasn't come out yet. It's a novel, Love and Gelato. Welch, Jenna Evans Welch. That's a good series. I think there's 3, and I don't think it's a series so much as 3 like interconnected. Let me think. My friend and former critique partner, Sarah Ennie, wrote this book called Tell Me Everything. I think if you like summer, you'd like that one too.
Sounds great. Oh, thanks for the recs. Yeah, I think the first one has been translated in Romanian, at least the first of the
Yeah, I
installments.
probably, because I'm pretty sure it's coming out on Netflix if it hasn't already. So usually once Netflix gets a hold of it, then like and Maureen Gu, if you haven't read any of her, like I Believe in a Thing Called Love, and they're all song titles. She's really, really fabulous.
All right.
She writes a lot about K-pop and
all right. Sounds good.
Yeah, very good.
That would go very well with part of our public. I think there's a lot of people who are fascinated by K-pop and K-dramas
K-pop.
and everything. Everything Asian. Yeah. It's true. Amazing. Thank you so much. We have another question, and it goes like this. Name 3 reasons why we should say yes to this book this summer, and what are its most important qualities? Okay, so they're basically asking you to sell this book to us, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'll put Maureen's name in the chat. It is, I think you talked about this earlier. It's kind of, I don't want to say a beach read because it's not just totally light and fluffy, but it's fun. It's set at the beach, so it feels like summer. But the characters, I think, are really interesting. They make interesting choices, and if you like swoony book boyfriends, there's 2 of them, so you could take your pick. But I also think it's, if you appreciate stories about people trying to sort of understand themselves and their place in the world, and when you're on that precipice between what you've always done and what you can do, it's a book that might strike a chord with you.
Are we satisfied?
Was that the only question?
Guys? Is it okay? Do you need
Is it what?
Okay, so the next question is, will you keep writing in the YA genre, or are you working on anything new?
Oh, yes, right. YA is my jam, and I am slowly but surely working on another book. COVID threw me for a loop because I have 3 kids, and we had Zoom kindergarten, and my husband works in an ICU, and so the last couple of years were rough. But I'm finally getting my bearings and figuring out the balance of, working full time and also continuing to write. So as I am blogging along, I am working on a new book, and I am excited about it.
And you cannot give us more details, no?
I mean, it's about a girl who accidentally not burns down, but starts a fire in the chemistry lab at school as a protest, and ends up having to spend the entire summer doing manual labor with her arch nemesis, who, if you like enemies to lovers kind of trope, that's what this is.
Sounds promising, actually. You seem to be like very fond of these strong female characters somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a thing for you.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Mm, mm.
And
Because
swoony boys.
or
Yeah, girls.
something to compensate a bit. Yeah, it's true. Right. So okay, this is promising. I'm still stuck with the setting the chemistry lab on fire and protests and everything. So it sounds really promising.
She didn't mean to set it on fire. It just happened.
Okay, it was an accident. Okay, I get it.
It was an accident. The protest was not an accident, but the fire part was.
Yeah. So we also have a comment from Mariuka in the chat. She says, not a question, but Miles popped off the page from his first scene. My first reaction was, he better not be the second lead that doesn't get the girl. So thank you for not leaving him in the second lead box.
Yeah. Yeah, he became very quickly the favorite, which is funny because, like I said, originally it was supposed to be the other way, but everybody was like, no. You can't do that.
I'm actually interested because we speak about this and about, love interests and enemies to lovers and all the other very famous tropes that YA tends to have. And based on a lot of teenagers that I work with, opinions that there shouldn't actually be a love story for a YA book to exist, and there shouldn't be so many YA books that focus solely on love stories. So I was just gonna pick a bit your mind and ask, what's your take on this? So should we have love and romance, or should we just tone them down a bit? How do you feel about this?
I think you can do both. It's sort of the reason that there is the genre of romance exists, but then also mysteries or cozies can exist that have no romance whatsoever. And I personally like romance books, not romance, not like the adult romance, but I like romance in my YA. It doesn't always have to be like a forever, you're my soulmate kind of romance. But I think relationships, both friendships and romantic relationships, are a huge part of life for a lot of people, and a huge part of growing up and sort of figuring out your way in the world is making those kinds of connections and learning. And some relationships are, for a season, and some are for forever. And I think I prefer YA romance that isn't necessarily like, okay, now we're 19 and we're getting married, because I don't think that's necessarily what those romances are meant to do or teach you. But I like romance in YA. But it doesn't all have to be romance. Courtney Summers' books do not contain much by way of romance, and I love them. So
yeah, so maybe not necessarily central. This is
I don't think every YA book has to have a romance, but I am fine with those that do.
Yeah. I mean, from your perspective, and when I come to think of it, it makes a lot of sense, because in the end, this is how we learn, and this is how we become the adults that we're going to be in the end. And it's also, I think, very important to have this very healthy idea of not every relationship is going to last forever, and it doesn't mean that it's the one. So I think that this concept is quite important, and it's also important to convey somehow that you can also stay friends with somebody you've been with, or you can also not stay friends, or even not talk to each other again, and it's also fine, and everything is fine. Embracing this kind of diversity in emotions is quite important, and I'm glad that you're actually a promoter of this.
And I think sometimes relationships end, and it teaches you as much about what you don't want as what you do want. So but you can't figure that out until you figure that out. So
you did mention that you also have a job and you also have kids. So I was curious about how do you manage actually? I think
That's
you
a
get
great
this question
question.
quite quite often, probably people asking you for how do you do it, but then I'm really
Yeah.
curious, like how do you do it? Do you have like
How
special
do
days for
I?
kids and special days for writing and special days for something, or how do you manage?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is I have a very supportive spouse. He is great, and he's a very involved parent as well. So it's not, we are a team, which is helpful because his goals are my goals and my goals are his goals. So that is important. Speaking of relationships. And then also I'm like, as you pointed out, I'm very organized. I have about 6 different planners, and I really do have to be very intentional, especially writing, because writing is probably the easiest thing to push on the back burner because I'm not under contract right now, so I don't have to produce anything. But if I don't do some, then I won't do some. So I have to sort of schedule. My goal right now is to try to write for about 3 hours a week, which is pretty manageable because I can do 20 minutes here, an hour here. That has been reasonable for me. We'll see. I'm also working on a second graduate degree, so that ebbs and flows with my time. I'm finishing up a huge research paper that I submitted to a conference, so I have to like do that. So I just try to be intentional as I can with writing in particular, and also give myself grace when there are weeks when that just can't happen because there's only 24 hours a day. So there's only so much I can do, and I have to sleep.
Yeah, as I said, you keep striking me as this kind of, down to earth person who actually knows exactly what they want. And it's very impressive to see this, because more often than not, I think that a lot of us get this idea that artsy people are like chaotic and very disorganized, and everything with them is like so,
Yeah. I know some people who are that way. I am just not personally. I am like, I like a little bit of structure in my life, which maybe going back to why I like to plot out my books as opposed to just going freewheeling, because not my nature.
I got a question via private message, and it says, if you get to have a say when choosing your book covers.
Yes and no. In my experience, I was asked to sort of send some ideas of what I thought, like a comparable covers that I thought, oh, this might be. But there's sort of this thing, especially in young adults, where there's kind of trends in covers. So, well, I think it happens actually in everything. Every romance novel that I've seen on shelves lately looks like a Colleen Hoover novel. So it's like whatever's selling hot, it sort of becomes the trend. But that said, they sent me a couple of sort of mock-ups or thumbnails of the direction they thought they were going in, and asked for my feedback. I offered it. They didn't really listen, but then they ended up eventually listening, because the cover that they originally sent me looks completely different from what it became. Like, different color palette. The original one was blue and yellow. It was like a girl with sunglasses, like just half of her face big. And it was like a photo, but not a photo, sort of an artsy filter or Photoshop filter on a photo. I liked it. I didn't think it quite hit the sweeter side of the book. It looked a little bit more like a sexy beach read book. And I was like, I mean, it might sell copies, but and then another thing I've learned in publishing is that whoever is in charge at the big retail bookstores, so in the US, at Barnes and Noble, has a lot of say over what the cover looks like if they're going to stock it on their shelves, like a lot of say. So you get a little bit of input, but mostly the publisher and the marketing and head of Barnes and Noble ultimately decide.
Yeah. But if you ask me, I think say yes, Summer looks great. I mean, it's
yeah,
like,
I really like how it turned out, and
you
I
know,
love
yeah.
the little details on the inside. And yeah,
Yeah, I'd also say that really. I'm really curious if the publishing house has kept the cover. Anna, do you know anything about this?
I
No.
don't.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Did you? No, nothing. Nobody knows.
You're talking with me? Sorry.
Yeah. If you know if Namira has kept the cover, like, does it have the original cover?
I
or
can show you that the
you
original. I
change
have it
it?
right here. This
So
is
that's the original
looks like.
cover.
No, it's
And
actually
then in the
cute.
back.
But I want to be a surprise.
Yeah,
But
so
I
it's gonna be a
promise
surprise.
you, it's very eatable and has a lot of donuts.
Whoa.
Ooh.
You will love it. I
Okay.
promise. I promise you'll love it.
It's funny because I've gotten a few foreign editions, and what's interesting to me is the French one is donuts instead of ice cream.
That's our cover also.
Oh, sorry, I just spoiled it.
It's okay. It's okay. It's already on our website. But yeah, that's
okay.
the cover. We loved it.
Yeah, I love it. It's so cute. And
We're
the
so
back
glad.
is cute. I
We're
love
so
it.
glad.
As long as we keep it around the edible pink
Yeah, right. You gotta have
things, I
some
think
kind of
it works
sweetness.
somehow. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quite nice. So thank you, Anna, for sharing this.
You're
I
welcome. You're
I
welcome.
actually put the a link to pre-order the book in the chat so you could see the cover.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, no worries. Thank you as well. Okay, so I think we have maybe time for 2 or 3 more questions. So if any of you guys have anything in mind, or if not, I will just check the social media again and see if there is something over there. If you just give me a minute. Oh yeah, Lindsay, there is one for you. So there is somebody who asks you if you like to write with or without music.
Oh, with 100%. I one of the first things I do when I start a project, sometimes even just a new chapter, is come up with a Spotify playlist that kind of sets the mood. And when I'm really in the writing thick of it, I pay for the Spotify premium so I don't get interrupted with commercials, because that's really jarring. Where you're like in this deep, moody scene, and all of a sudden it's like, and don't forget your car insurance from Geico or whatever, like really loud. But I love music, and it doesn't bother me if it has lyrics or not. And to this day, there are certain songs that will come on the radio that were really important in a particular scene that I've written, and I like am instantly transported to that moment. I'm like, oh.
You should share them. I mean, I keep telling
The
this to
playlist?
writers that, you should actually share the playlist that you're using, because
Yeah.
that some of the writers have come into this habit of putting a small playlist at the beginning of the book or at the end of the book, something that they were listening to a lot during the writing part, or they just thought of as being somehow associated with the book. But I really feel that you guys should share it on social media more often, because I think it's quite catchy for people to know what you're listening to. Yeah, just my 2 cents maybe. And speaking of this, we have this question from Roxy. Do you have a song in mind that can represent the vibe of Say Yes Summer?
Oh man. Yes. This is the song I listened to the most when I was writing. It is Maggie Rogers' Light On. You heard that song. That was the one that was like, whenever I was really like in the thick of the emotional heavy, that was a big one.
That's the greatest song of all times. It's so good to hear you say that it fits Say Yes Summer. I agree. That's so nice.
Yeah, that was because it's fun, but it's also there's like a kind of an angsty. Yeah. It's
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Roxy, for putting us in a good mood. I'm gonna listen to the song because I didn't know it. Right. So yeah, basically that was pretty much it. If there are no other questions at the moment, but I would just like to take 2 more minutes of your time, Lindsey, to say that
Sure.
it was quite great to actually have a bit of an opening to the book, because as I said, in Romania, if you haven't read it in English already, then it's only on pre-order at the moment in translation. So people are actually going to have a huge surprise when receiving it and being able to read it. So I think this was actually quite a nice introduction, you know, to have this vibe and to have this idea about what you're going to get, and still not to know a lot about everything that, you know, Rachel is saying yes to. So I think that's also quite important, not to know everything that she's saying yes to, because we have a lot of things in our minds now, I think. So yeah, I would very much like to thank you for doing this, and just maybe as a somehow, I think, nice way to say goodbye to all of those who are watching us right now and will be watching the recording and everything. If you could leave us with something that you feel it's very important for a writer, and maybe it's something that's not so in your face, like, you know, you should have a routine, or you should be flexible, or you should be creative, like something unexpected. What's important for a writer from your perspective?
Honestly, I think it's literally just to do it. Like, a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and be like, "Oh, you wrote a book. I want to write a book someday." La la la. And I'm like, then do it. Like, it's never going to happen if you just leave it in your head. So honestly, it's just, even if you carry around a notebook and you just jot down a couple sentences a day, well, that's a couple more sentences than you had yesterday. I think sometimes we build it up in our minds as like this big lofty thing, and really it's just a series of saying yes to writing and, you know, taking time to just make it happen. And it, you know, even if it takes you 3 years to write your first manuscript, then, you know, it takes you 3 years. What else are you doing? But I think that's really the important thing for me, is just to honestly do it, and not, you know, make excuses, not hem and haw, not spend all this time. You know, a lot of people who spend all this time like doing these insane detailed character profiles and building, I mean, I like playlists, but building, you know, to get everything just perfectly right before they'll start writing. Honestly, I think if you're struggling, just write. Even if it doesn't end up into your final manuscript, at least you're like making strides and progress and learning about, you know, the characters and the world that you're building. It's not very profound.
Yeah, it's actually quite a very nice line, you know, with "say yes summer, say yes book, say yes publish, say yes now." Yeah. It's getting places. I really love this. Right. Okay, so guys, if you are watching us, and or you will be watching us on cartu.xyz later, this was Lindsey Roth Culli with you live at FestivalYA. And please remember that her second book, Say Yes Summer, is available on Namira's website for pre-orders. So
look like
go
this.
there and grab it. Yeah, it's gonna look like
It'll be
this
a
without the
different
French
language.
title.
It won't be in French.
Exactly, it won't be in French, we promise. And Lindsey, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
you.
This was a better afternoon with us. So thank you for this. And what can we say? Fingers crossed for your new plot.
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that one. I really love the way it sounds. So I'm crossing my fingers for you to get everything you want for it to become real. So thank you.
Thank you. It was great to be here, you all.
I'm happy. Thank you, everyone. Have a very nice evening.